Rejected content.
Welcome back to Rejected Content. Now, many of you may remember last year when I built my then brand new mini bike, an MB200. Now, that build turned out fantastically. It was very fun to ride, but I never really meshed with that bike. And so I made a very unfortunate trade for a 1970s Sears mini bike. But what I've always really wanted is one of these, a Mega Moto 212. Owen had one named Mama's Boy. We built this one for Satara, as many of you may have seen. But I have finally ended up with my own Mega Moto 212. At least, kind of. This is a Coleman B200, and as you may be able to see, it shares many similarities with the Mega Moto 212. And that is no coincidence. A couple years back, Mega Moto actually went out of business, and Coleman was able to purchase many of their assets, including the design for this bike. As of now, Coleman produces 3 versions of this bike, the B200, the B200R, and the B200 RSV. And I will get into the differences between those 3 models, but they all share some slight differences with the Mega Moto 212 from which they come. So today, I'm going to go through those differences. We're going to compare them comprehensively and decide which one you should still get, because Go Power Sports actually purchased all of the extra stock when Mega Moto went out of business, so you can still buy a roller or a kit of this bike to this day. Starting out with the differences between the 3 Coleman bikes, here they are listed on the board. Now, the B200 and the B200 RSV are nearly identical except for the color and the fact that the RSV adds a swing arm. The prices of those are $8.99 and $9.99. So you decide for $100 if a swing arm is worth it for you. The bike that makes the least sense out of the 3, in my opinion, is the B200R, or C for camouflage. This is effectively a decontented B200, and it sells for $100 less at $7.99. For this $100 decrease, though, you lose your front brake and you lose your torque converter in exchange for a centrifugal clutch, which decreases your speed from 30 miles an hour down to about 23. I think that this does not make sense, and I think it's pretty much sold just to confuse people, because the bike is a pretty heavy one, and I don't think that the centrifugal clutch would perform at a very high level in this scenario. Now on to the differences between the Mega Moto and the Coleman, of which there are actually more than you'd expect based on how they first look. Now, both included engines are clones of Honda GX motors, but the Colemans all come with 196cc clones, while the Mega Moto actually comes with a 212cc clone, which is just, a little bit more displacement, a little bit more low-end torque. Comparing specifically against this B200, both of these bikes actually have front and rear hydraulic brakes, although what's interesting is that Coleman ships their bikes with about 2-inch wider brake discs, although on the Mega Motos there are 2 piston calipers in the front and back, and on this bike there is a dual piston caliper in the rear and a single piston caliper in the front. Now, I assume this is for more inexperienced riders, as you can just slam on both brakes at the same time, and the Coleman will prevent you from flinging over the handlebars because of the weaker front brake. In addition, both bikes also ship with front headlights, although the Mega Moto option is an incandescent bulb, and the Coleman is a much brighter LED. What's interesting, though, is that they cost-cut out the light switch on the Coleman, so it's just on at all times by default. As a side note, they also moved the position of the rectifier from the, in my opinion, horrible position right in front of the fender to a spot nice and tucked up behind this fascia piece. Although these bikes do look quite similar, by far the biggest differences between them is actually within the frame. When Coleman purchased the design from Mega Moto, they made some changes, and you can decide for yourself whether they are to save costs or to optimize the design. In regards to shape, you can see that the front bar of the frame comes directly up from under the motor and meets the steering stem. While on the Coleman, the main bar goes up and then back, with a little piece of tube under the Coleman plaque for support. Additionally, in the back, you can see that the piece of frame that supports the wheel and axle meets up with the rear bar about halfway here, with an interesting bend right south of this rack. On the Coleman, both pieces of tubing are actually continuous and begin from the front and then go all the way back to the handlebars. May seem minor, but the rack on the Mega Moto is actually square-shaped, while on the Coleman it has been curved. A fairly significant structural change to the bike has to do with the plate that supports the engine. On the Mega Moto, you can see it is a thin piece of steel that goes from here all the way back, and actually on Owen's bike it cracked on our Wisconsin trip after experiencing stress. While on the Coleman bike you can see that it is formed from a much larger and thicker piece of actually folded metal, which should do a good job at making that area of the bike more sturdy. In addition, the foot pegs that come with the bike are slightly different, and the supports on the Coleman are gusseted. The seats on the bikes also feel very different, with the Mega Moto one being much more comfortable in my opinion. The Coleman one is rock solid and feels like it is made out of cardboard. They do appear to be interchangeable though, so if you prefer the comfort of one over another, you can make that swap. In regards to quality of construction, I would say that they're both fairly similar, although I would give the slight edge to the Mega Moto. The welds are a little bit better, the tubing is a little bit thicker in some places, although both of them are actually constructed very nicely. Coleman also redesigned all of the plastics on the bike, including both fenders, the front triangle guard, and the clutch and chain covers. Which style you prefer is completely personal preference, although I do like the direction that Coleman took with this design. Overall, both bikes are fantastic. Although there are pros and cons and trade-offs to each one, I think they're very minor, and I think your purchasing decision is probably going to come down to which one you could find for cheapest on your local Facebook marketplace.